If you could just confirm, oh, there we go.
Yep, should be all set.
Okay. I'm going to get going, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning and good evening, everybody. As you join in, please let me welcome to the USIBC. We're doing a workshop on the CERT-in notification rules. We're really pleased to, this is our second round, by the way. We did a quick response webinar, and this is an in-person workshop. And so I want to thank those of you that have joined us. I'm really pleased to be here with Aditya from Juniper Networks and Super Team as well. One of the benefits of the person is you get coffee, so that'll be coming soon, and this would be a good time for you to do the same. A lot of us have seen the CERT rules. It's created a lot of concern, apprehension, and a little anxiety. So today what we wanted to do is dive a little bit deeper into what the rules mean, how we, an individual company like Juniper may respond, and as well, what does USIBC want to do? So I'm going to hand it over to Super Team and Drew Simonis. Super Team is a partner at Khaitan and Company. Thank you for hosting us, sir. Really appreciate this. And I am here in Bangalore with Aditya from Juniper Networks. And I also have Drew Simonis from Juniper, who is the CISO calling in from Texas. We want this to be conversational. We do have some slides. We want to take questions, but we really do want it to provide an opportunity to get deeper into what this means. And during our conversation, we want to figure out at the end, where do we want to go from here? How do we want to advocate with the government kind of going forward? Because as is, I think, as I mentioned up front, the rules are going to cause a lot of compliance concerns and issues going forward. So with that, let me hand it over to Super Team to begin the conversation. And over to you, sir.
Thank you. I'll just project my screen. So like Jay was mentioning, there are two parts to this conversation probably. One is the legal side of it, and then the other side is the technical side of it. I think we are very pleased to have Juniper also with us to provide all the technical inputs and aspects that need to be discussed today. I'll quickly get started. This will be the route map for the day. We'll talk about the present day cybersecurity reporting framework in India. What do we have right now? Of course, discussions about CERT's new direction and the concerns like Jay mentioned. We'll talk about the key compliances that are coming up, a probable impact of the new direction, and finally the way ahead. Q&A, of course, I think will flow through the discussion. And this presentation will be circulated, I believe, Jay, to everyone. At the end is a set of annexures. So all your rules, sections, etc., you will get as a single, as a one-stop shop in this particular slide deck itself. With that, let's talk about what do we have as a law today. So CERT is the National Agency for Incident Response. And the way IB Act is drafted today, it's saying that incidents may be reported to CERT minus few, which are mandatorily to be reported to CERT as early as possible to leave scope for action. So in short, there is one set of incidents which are mandatorily to be reported, but again, there is no hard timeline. It says as early as possible to leave scope for action. Now, what we've been observing is that earlier, when we used to report an incident to CERT, we used to hardly hear back from them. It is a PDF document. You fill up the details, you mail it to them, and usually there was no response back. During COVID times, we started observing that they indeed started replying back, and sometimes within 24 hours. Incidentally, on 20th of January 2021, they came out with an advisory. Interestingly, this advisory says that you need to report all data breach, data leak to CERT and not have any categorization. Okay, so they say that all kinds of, it meant every kind of data breach really. And it also says that you should immediately notify users or customers who could be affected with details of information breached, actions taken, and how they can reach out to you for queries. So interestingly, this goes beyond the IT Act today as it stands, because that does not have any provision for data subject reporting. Okay, we don't know what's the fate of this particular advisory given the new direction, but definitely it created some kind of a concern, because initially the industry thought this is just an advisory. Then we started getting some matters where clients started getting notices, and those notices say that, okay, we understand that there could have been a breach. Please let us know if you have intimated us, question number one. Question number two, did you inform your users or data subjects? And below that, they copy pasted the link for this particular advisory. Now, tricky situation for most people who would get such a notice, because on that day, if it's a bad day for an organization, they would not like to challenge and say that, listen, you don't have the authority. Okay. So anyway, so this is what has been happening during the COVID times, and then interestingly, we have this direction which was issued on 28th of April 2022. It is to come into effect within 60 days, which is I think 27th of June 2022. This is supposed to take effect. Who all are covered? In short, we'll call this covered entities as we go along in this discussion. It is all service providers, which is telecom service providers, network service providers, etc. All intermediaries like social media intermediaries, body corporates. Now, this is a very wide definition, okay? It means companies, firms, sole proprietorship, everything. So this is the whole universe. Then government organizations and data centers. So, and it also states in this direction that, if you're not following the diktat that is given here, there could be punishment under 17B7, which is essentially 1 year imprisonment or about $1,300 fine or both. So basically a penal provision. What led to this direction? I'm not going into the depth of this, but one of the reasons is there was huge criticism against CERT. There were a number of big data breaches which happened in India, and it was not clear what actions CERT had actually taken in relation to those breaches. I'll straight away jump into the first direction, which is mandatory cybersecurity incident reporting, and I'll keep maybe requesting Jay and Drew, Aditya to let us know your thoughts also. What does it say? It says that all the covered entities that we talked about should mandatorily report the specific cybersecurity incidents to CERT within 6 hours of noticing such incidents or being brought to notice about such incident. Ajay, I don't know to what extent we would like to discuss the FAQs, but maybe we just want to touch upon it. There's some nuances of that which is relevant here.
Sure, I'll just jump in and just reference that some FAQs have been floating around informally. It's not an official document. I think many of us have seen a copy. Government inquiries have suggested that it was not officially released. And so that places industry, I think, in an odd position. You have FAQs that look pretty real, look and feel pretty authentic, government saying that they're not. And in addition, there's no alternative mechanisms to engage with the government. That puts USIBC and others in an odd situation. Do you respond to the government vis-a-vis these FAQs, which are clearly out there in the community, or not? And so, again, that sort of adds to a lot of the uncertainty and anxiety that we've been hearing from our members. So thank you.
Right. So I think we'll, of course, just keep it to pure discussion purposes only, and we'll not put too much reliance on this. But remember that these FAQs are saying that this is not a legal document. It does not replace or amend any or alter any the IT Act or the rules. It is also an evolving document and can undergo changes. So you can imagine, like, there's quite a bit of uncertainty around this piece. But why I really brought in this particular topic here, Jay, is that saying there are certain questions which have been raised. And one of it is that who should report? Is it, say, a service provider? If are they supposed to report it, or is it the outsourcer who's supposed to do it? So the response there is it's the entity which has observed it, basically, who's observed it first. So that way, so.
So that, I mean, just to jump in, that actually means that you could have multiple entities
Yeah.
responding to the same incident, which is probably what the government wants to a certain degree, right? I mean, they want as much data as they can from their point of view, but then that also creates confusion because different entities theoretically or practical terms might respond differently to what that threat nature would be. You're gonna,
We don't know the format if it is available, so, I mean, in a live network scenario where you have the managed services provider, you have a maintenance service provider, you have the operator, the three entities at least at the same network, right? Doing almost or taking care of the same issues, so practically all three of them, between three of them, who will do?
or all three and
Yeah.
and provide either the same or different information. And I would see that if one provided and the other doesn't, within 6 hours, you now are in a position of potential financial or criminal jeopardy.
Yeah, and I'd also
Well,
say that.
and it actually gets worse. You know, the reality is that you know, a service provider will have a contract with the service consumer, and in that contract there'll also be notification criteria, perhaps even what we won't tell people. And so you may now force a service provider to notify their customer of activity that is so mundane, right? Because of the nature of the disclosure rules in this, the suspected, the potential, the possible, right? You have to notify the government in India of all these things. And even the things that are actual, like scanning and probing, are so routine and common. And so now, you know, you put a service provider in a situation where they're going to have to notify the government of these events. Do they then also notify their customer of these events? And how does the customer, or how do the customers have the capacity? So you know, we talk a lot about the burden that this is going to place on CERT in India, but it's also going to place a tremendous burden on service providers and their customers.
And also, don't forget the incidents could be, I mean, like, for example, here severity level 1, 2, and 3, and nothing. So, I mean, what level and which incident you want to report to? Otherwise, I mean, these incidents like severity level 1, non-critical and usual, happens every day, every hour. So, what do you want to report? I mean, at what
Yeah,
level?
well, and you don't have a choice, right? There's no clear a materiality threshold or any sort of guidance about severity that the follower of these rules can lean on. And so it's almost like with this 6-hour timeline, any competent incident monitoring organization, you know, maybe a little hyperbole, but they should just start an open line every day, and keep CERT on the phone and just sort of have a running dialogue. So common are some of these incidents that they describe.
And
Right. I think interestingly, it also says that you cannot contract out and outsource this activity to someone else because it's a statutory obligation.
Is that in the FAQs or
Yeah,
in the?
FAQs.
In the FAQs, which we, just to reconfirm that we do not have we do not know the authenticity of those FAQs.
Right. So
Yeah.
I think back to the slide, Jay. So the other important aspect which we wanted to cover under this head is even possible attempts or suspected adverse effects to also be reported. Because if you read the 2013 CERT rules also, it gives a flavor that, you know, suspected adverse effects are to be reported. To add to that, the present list, the new added items of cybersecurity incident that are to be reported, has things like suspicious activities mentioned multiple times. So
I'll note
with
that we have a hand raised in the room.
Oh, please, Bashakar, why don't you come online or go ahead?
Hey, thanks so much. I'm sorry I can't switch on the camera. Am I audible?
You are, please go ahead.
Okay, great. Hey, so I just had a question on the cybersecurity incident list. You know, the first 10 in the list are something that were already applicable, right? I mean, all of us were supposed to have been reporting on all of this. And I just wanted to understand, at least in the past, has anybody actually questioned, you know, why targeted scanning, probing of critical network systems, you know, has been in the list, or why are we questioning it now? Is it only because it has a 6-hour reporting time? Just wanted to understand that a little better.
Excellent
Yeah,
question.
yeah,
Sorry, if I
my
can-
viewpoint would be it got our
Sorry.
attention.
Right. I think this is an excellent question because some of the things that we are getting disturbed about today were actually all there in the IT Act and the rules. It's only that now that things have been brought to the forefront again, and B, the 6-hour reporting requirement which has been brought in. Probably all of this taken together has garnered more interest around this. But having practiced in this space, let me tell you that even when we used to report these kind of incidents, there were hardly much of a reply or revert earlier from CERT. Okay, so I think we can move on. And then what Jay and I we were thinking is that probably we'll do a quick comparison as to how does these direction stack up against global best practices or standards. So now the reporting requirement is 6 hours. Globally, most of the standards talk about 72 hours. Our directions are wide and quite ambiguous as we're discussing, and the list of cybersecurity which are required to be reported. Mostly global standards talk about harm-based principle. Our directions lack clarity clearly. And when we look at those global best practices, they usually talk about reporting confirmed incidents. Again, when we talk about our directions, there could be issues pertaining to multiple reporting. I think Nilima put up an excellent question last time when we were doing a rapid read, that it could be to your sectoral regulators, to CERT, and maybe in future, if the Data Protection Act comes, then to that authority. And Jay, I think we were also discussing that these days, cybersecurity incidents would be generally across the globe, right? So you would be reporting to multiple authorities in different formats and timelines. So as a best practice globally, what we observe is interagency sharing of reporting at times. And the last point is, under our direction, there is no express limitation on how certain may utilize this information. Of course, there's a provision under the IT Act and rules where they should sort of safeguard the data and maintain secrecy. But globally, when we look at this similar line item, we'll see that there should be guardrails where how the government can use the data submitted to these entities.
Yeah, well,
So-
and that's a super important one, Supra. I think it's worth talking about in a couple of different dimensions, because the reality is that this information can be very sensitive, particularly 6 hours after it's discovered. Like, we're talking a lot about the noise that this is going to generate in terms of reporting benign events like scanning and probing, or potentially benign events. But there's real material harm to a company if they report an active incident in progress to an agency where they have no idea what that information is going to lead to. How will, because one of the other dimensions of this requires you to then cooperate with CERT in any way that they deem necessary. And so how are they going to come in, and are they going to potentially disrupt your investigation? Are they going to take your investigation in ways that you wouldn't have for their own benefits? Are they going to share this information with other regulatory agencies that may end up in you being penalized for something? Are they going to share it with the public in a way that can cause you liability? Like, you have no idea where this information is going to end up, and 6 hours after you discover it, you may not really even understand the scope and scale of what you've gotten into. I've been part of security incidents where from detection to eradication was measured in years. And so to say that you'll have a sense of what you're talking about 6 hours after you first observe something is sort of preposterous in the context of a severe incident. So there's a lot of really concerning dimensions of this, particularly the nature of the rules. You'll see later, I think you'll talk about it. I don't want to jump too far ahead, but like with the KYC checks that are in here, which have nothing to do with cybersecurity. And so to say that this data shared with CERT will be limited in its use for only security related activities, I think is also a little bit unbelievable given the way that this rule evolves later on.
Right.
I'm going to jump in on just that different topic, but we've seen that in where the government will have one kind of objective and then something else gets tacked onto it. I mean, we saw this in the privacy bill, and let's add in non-personal data, or the JPC says, let's add in rearranging the SWIFT network, which has to do with something totally outside of privacy, but it gets tacked on. So the KYC aspect, to me, that seems like another objective from somewhere else in the government that said, oh, where can we promulgate it quickly, and boom, there it goes on to something that's particularly relevant.
Well, that's right, and so they're trying to get on the ship that's leaving port, but the nature of this rulemaking without any public consultation, it sort of makes that sort of tack on even more onerous.
Yeah. I see a question. Why don't we jump to that? Swati, over to you.
No, it's just a comment here, Drew and Jay. The KYC aspect is, I think, alluding to the RBI guidelines. I would agree with you. Yes, they've brought in a new thing, but I think that's what they're alluding to. They said it can be done by the financial service providers. It can be done by anybody and everybody.
Thank you.
Yeah, but we all know it isn't trivial for even the financial service providers, and so, who's going to build this sort of compliance capability in every company out there?
I think we can move on to the next direction, which is.
Wait, we have one more question, Jason. Yes, no? Going once, going twice. Jason Joseph, over to you, sir.
Hey, I had a few questions on this. So when I'm talking about reporting, what if I report false positives, and what defines non-compliance essentially in their terms? So that is one question which I would have, and a follow-up is, when I'm looking at the name body corporates, now it automatically follows that any company registered under the Companies Act, proprietorship, whatever, etc., would be part of this. So startups and mid-sizes mostly will be going with managed SOC services or MXDR solutions. In this case, notwithstanding the terms of the SLA, whose responsibility will it ultimately be? So, your thoughts on all these kind of things.
So I think what they have done is they have kind of stuck to the letter of the direction and emphasized that it is the entity which is actually observed it, and it cannot be any other entity. Of course, another entity may report it, but primarily whoever has noticed that cybersecurity incident necessarily need to report. Now, I'll tell you from my previous experiences, talking about false negatives, positives. Out of abundant caution, I've seen some organizations going ahead and reporting whatever they are aware of, rather than sort of deciding whether this is something which is squarely falling within the category. They've just stated what they know. And often we have seen that there's been no follow-on questions to that.
But to go back deeper, to go back to that question, it's going to cover most companies.
Yeah, all.
Okay, so it's going to cover all companies. Okay.
Body corporate is the whole universe.
Okay, and yeah, all right. So I think that's really a critical point, that while initially the intention of this has caught the eyes and ears and maybe the hearts of sort of the digital community, there's going to be a large number of companies here across India. Do we have any idea how many corporate bodies there are in India? Right? And so there's going to be a massive volume of information flowing in.
I would actually draw a parallel between this versus the listing agreement, let's say, right? I mean, there is a parallel universe. So you have this listing agreement where stock exchanges want you as a listed entity to report any incident which is material as per the listing agreement to the stock exchange before it comes to the public domain, right? Now, we are supposed to, as an entity, we are supposed to inform the stock exchange, and if they come to know beforehand through any newspapers or something, they ask us why you didn't do it, right? And I think they're trying to do something similar that, you also inform me where you inform others, and then I will decide what should I do about it.
No, I think CERT notices are like that these days.
Yeah.
What we've been observing is that we have come to know that, this is what has happened. Here are the 3 links. So you will actually find news and newspaper links.
Yes.
And then the
They are
narration.
actually behaving like a stock exchange.
Yeah.
While the stock exchanges have a right to actually, kind of have action against you, against your listing, and, kind of suspend it or whatever do.
Right.
We're not sure because the penalties are really harsh here. So, I mean, we don't know what kind of action they will take or not take if it doesn't happen.
I have a sort of.
Well, I think what you're going to end up with is a form of kind of vicious compliance in the context of CYA. You're going to have potentially people trying to overwhelm the system to overthrow it. I'm sure that's going to occur, but because the CERT intent is not clear, there's no real purpose behind all this that you can clearly point out. This is why they're trying to get this information from us. So I kind of think people are going to share everything. Particularly you talk about suspected or potential or possible. The legal side is I can end up in an argument about whether that was a potential breach or not. So practically speaking, a lot of companies who don't have the wherewithal to defend such a legal action are just going to share everything and say, you know what, this all could have been that, and you've sorted out and do whatever you want to do with it. Which is sort of detrimental to whatever purpose they might have had, published or not.
Great. I see a question from gallery.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Go ahead, please.
Hello.
We
Okay,
can hear
great.
you. Go ahead.
So this is more of a comment in the context of consequence. I want to draw everybody's attention to section 79(2)(c) of the IT Act, which essentially is quite broad in terms of claiming safe harbor. It says the intermediaries has to observe due diligence while discharging his duties under this act. Right, so it's not just the SPDI rule or any or the intermediary rules. Other than that, also these certain directions and rules also should get included in this wide ambit. So if there is a slight non-compliance, would it even lose? They would lose the safe harbor. That is another consequence I can see from this reading.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Before we move on to synchronization, just a question. I've heard that call fraud is really increased in India. Would that be covered? Is that considered an incident? If you at a corporation receive a call that has to do with a ransomware or a fraud sort of thing, would that be covered? Because that would also generate a massive volume of.
That to me, that feels like that's a sort of phishing. I mean, smishing or vishing or whatever ishing you want to, put in front of it.
Legal thoughts on that?
I think we'll have to read these within what has been already provided, not specifically. It has not been provided specifically, but some of these are really quite broad brush. So, there's a high possibility that some of these could fall within the category of these broad brushed items that are there.
Okay, great. Back over to you. Any other questions in this topic before we move to the synchronization elements?
Okay. If nothing, then we'll talk about this. I'll actually just mention what is being mentioned here in relation to the clock synchronization, and probably we'll fall back on Drew and Aditya to give some thoughts on this. What could be the pain points really from a tech perspective? So what does the direction say? It says that all these covered entities that we talked about need to connect to Network Time Protocol (NTP) servers of National Informatics Center (NIC) or National Physical Laboratory (NPL), or to servers traceable to these NTP servers for synchronization of their information and communication technology systems. clocks. And covered entities with ICT infrastructure which are spanning across multiple geographies may use accurate and standard time sources other than NPL and NIC, provided their time source does not deviate from NPL and NIC. So I'll just keep pause there. There are certain concerns which we have heard from the industry which have jotted down, but I think I'll leave it to Drew and get to talk about this.
Yeah, I'm actually more relaxed about this one, given the second dot on the synchronization, the allowance for other reliable sources. The real burden would come in if you had to configure your Indian technology estate differently than the rest of your global technology estate. But that allowance to use other sort of trusted time sources that don't deviate, and you'd hope that most of the countries out there that have national time sources or those that are commonly used for international time would not deviate from those, and so that burden is somewhat alleviated from my perspective thanks to that second item.
Right.
I mean, same here because I don't see an issue. I mean, I'm not technically as competent as an engineer, but synchronizing with its national time server, assuming that we are reporting using the same standards as others, should be okay. I don't know about the nitty-gritty. I assume it's already there. Otherwise, how would you synchronize it?
It sort of begs the question though, why is it there if it's not a problem, right?
They may be trying to catch a fish by pulling a.
The chatter that we hear in the industry that this could be a problem for some of the industry players, and also whether NIC and NPL they would be able to handle this is something which is being questioned. So we've jotted down anyways what we hear from the industry here. I'll move on to the next slide.
It may be challenging for smaller companies that are not making use of network time synchronization for sure.
Right. The next one is localization of ICT system logs. What it says is all these covered entities are to mandatorily enable logs of their ICT systems to localize their secure storage within India for a rolling period of 180 days. I think we have had enough discussions on localization, so I'll not go in depth into it. But concerns from the industry that you have heard, some of the key ones we have jotted down here again. First is storage space to increase compliance costs. Logs generated on other servers need to be mandatorily stored in Indian servers. Foreign companies with no physical presence in India will have to invest in infrastructure for localizing servers. Performance efficiency may drop. Personal information contained in the logs at risk of surveillance and data breach, because you kind of collating everything and putting it at one place. So I'll pause there again, Drew. Aditya, if you have any thoughts, very happy.
Yeah, well, I guess my main thought is logs of what? That's the sort of Pandora's box that comes into play, because you can get on let's say a Windows computer, a desktop PC, you can get very verbose in what is logged, or you can be very minimal, and lots of room between those two ends of the spectrum. And so without a standard to meet that says this is the sort of data you need to be logging, that there's always a little bit of worry that because you have to supply data to CERT you have to supply them the logs for the events, that they come back and they say, these logs are not adequate to determine the nature of the event, and therefore you're not meeting the spirit of the regulation. Or the other side is that you get so verbose on the logging to cover yourself that you penalize the performance of your systems. You generate a significant volume of data that you've got to keep and maintain, and so on and so forth. So again, the sort of nebulous nature of this requirement doesn't help anybody actually satisfy it and meet the intent.
Good. I was going to say, this also just sounds like something that bigger companies can handle more easily than smaller companies. And something that I would actually kind of go back to is, there's so much push now on, small startups. But what we haven't even talked about is some of the e-commerce providers, right? I mean, I presume at some point those individuals that are selling jewelry on the fairly small scale, right? They may not be corporations now, but at some point I imagine they would legally be required. And this might be like a mom and pop shop, right?
No, I think Jay is spot on. I think this is a problem which is being raised across the industry. That are we drafting our laws keeping big tech in mind? And you know, if you look at all these draft legislations, etc., that have been coming up, I think we are focusing on them and drafting legislation. But you're right.
No, if you look at the RBI regulations on the banking sector, that all the data has to be localized for all the payments data, and then the way the personal data regulation, the new regulations, which is going to be tabled in Parliament now, is coming up. They are all trying to achieve one objective, which is to, as much as possible, create a regulation to enable or force, let's say, initially, data in India.
In fact, the data localization circular, RBI's, it starts with saying to have increased, to enable increased monitoring.
Correct.
So that seems to be the primary intention.
So if you go to a government minister or government department and say, okay, the purpose is to increase investments in India, storage in India, they say, yeah, that's the purpose. So that's not good. So they're exactly trying to catch the same fish using different routes. So one is the RBI doing it through BFSI circulars, the personal data, the Information Technology Act, the regulations on the personal data is changing to allow or enable the storage, and then this one. So they're all trying to attack through different industries and ministries to do that. So this is not a wonder.
Right. So we move on with the next direction, which is basically retention of customer and subscriber information. And what it says is data centers, virtual private server providers, cloud service providers, virtual private network service providers to register specified information accurately about customers and subscribers for 5 years or longer as required by law after the cancellation or withdrawal of the registration. Now, of course, the items are all there, what you need to really jot down and safekeep, which is validated names, internet protocols, purpose of hiring, validated address and contact numbers. But the one which was in the eye of the storm is the last one, which is ownership pattern of subscribers or customers hiring the services. So again, we kind of allude to the purported FAQ, which is kind of clarified slightly on this. It says that this particular direction is not to be directed for enterprise or corporate VPNs. And the second thing is that point number 5 is trying to say that you get only basic information, like it is an individual or a partnership firm, and perhaps brief particulars of the key management, and nothing more than that. But to our mind, even that would be slightly tricky.
Well, and what does it have to do with cybersecurity breach notifications? I mean, it's one of these areas where they're drifting off of the message.
Right. So I think again, certain concerns that we have collated from industry players. Many VPN providers operate on no log policy and do not have infrastructure to retain the information. Anonymity, which is the USP of VPN providers, will become ineffective. Added onus of validating customer subscriber information and extensive granular details sought to be procured. So that's that on this particular direction.
Yeah, it's less about the logging, and that point number 2, I think, is the key, because that anonymity is the purpose of the VPN. So it's the reason that service exists, and this regulation basically destroys the value of the business.
Yeah, Bashaka, you have a question again, please. Over to you.
Hey, thanks. So it's not a question, it's actually sharing, as we evaluate the notification, we realize that creating this kind of a mechanism to capture this information that the notification requires is a substantial task. The engineering and architecting, task for team. And I don't think there is any team in the world who can do it in the 60 days and forget about the remaining 30 days. So I don't know what others are thinking, but this is something that is extremely important for us to realize. I think a lot of focus has been on the privacy perspective and VPNs and VPS, but I think the practicality of it, the seamless experience of customers who will be onboarded all of these platforms. I think especially cloud services, which is now becoming a preference, whether it's for students or corporates or otherwise. I think that's a big issue that somehow is being missed out.
Right.
Well, and we talked earlier about the focus on big tech. I mean, cloud service provider is very, again, nebulous. And if you're a startup that's offering your software as a service, is that something that makes you a cloud service provider? Like, it's certainly not clear.
Well, as per the MATI definition, I think it is, because they talk about three models of service deployment under the cloud service provider empanelment.
So you're referencing another sort of government definition in sort of a procurement setting that may indirectly translate to how this might be defined.
Yes, it could. Let's hope not. Fingers crossed. We want to minimize damage.
We'll make sure to delete that off of anything we release publicly.
Right. So I think we'll move on in the interest of time. So this one is an interesting one, which they've talked about compliances for virtual asset industry. And they say that virtual asset service providers, virtual asset exchange providers, and custodian wallet providers to mandatorily maintain KYC records and records of financial transactions for 5 years. Key question is CERT direction the right place to address compliance of virtual asset industry? My colleague here and partner Sanjay has done extensive work, and maybe we can throw some light. But otherwise, also if you have any thoughts, request the audience to also react to this, because honestly, in the media we have not seen too much on this one. The rest of the items have seen a lot of buzz, but this is something that has not really caught the attention of.
So just as a layman, just to understand this, so this would be on a number of the cryptocurrency platforms that any trader going back and forth and exchanging cryptocurrency or any, in theory, utility or use of cryptocurrency would need to have KYC. So that actually eliminates one of the rationales for cryptocurrencies. One of them is that sort of anonymity piece as well, right?
I think if we have Sanjay and I, we were speaking. Yeah.
So I think I hope I'm audible, but it is something that most larger platforms were anyway doing.
Yeah.
They maintain KYC because there are constant money laundering and other investigations that the authorities in India at least keep undertaking. So most major platforms do keep this in mind. And these KYC retention obligation, etc., are also in line with some of the obligations that apply to NBFCs, etc. Right. So as a financial services sector, one is sort of prepared to do this, and most crypto exchanges follow these norms to some extent.
Even NFTs, not just cryptocurrency.
That's correct. So this is virtual assets, and they not only cover cryptos but also NFTs, and because it is widely sort of used.
I guess from industry, the primary concern is not the nature of the rule itself. To your point, it may be something that's well within the ability of the covered entity. The real concern is just what does this have to do with CERT's mandate, and why is CERT exceeding their mandate to introduce this sort of financial AML type of rulemaking, and to what other areas will they in the future extend their reach? And it goes back to the comments I made earlier. What is the nature of their use of the information that they're sharing with you? If they're showing that they're willing to move out of their scope so broadly here, are they going to perform all sorts of analytics on the data that you're sharing, use it for different purposes, share it with other agencies, penalize you for something that you did or didn't do, all based on the nature of the data you're sharing? So it's sort of scope creep writ large. That's a big concern for me from an industry perspective.
Absolutely. It is going over and beyond their
central bank's function now.
Yeah. In fact, whatever is a KYC requirement, it flows from a consumer welfare perspective, and which is not really CERT's mandate. But if you see the wording of the directions itself, obviously the first thing that they put is cybersecurity, and then they kind of draw in to protect financial freedom, economic freedom, fundamental rights. So that extension could be an overreach, you could say.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So anyway, so we quickly move on to the next point, which is appointment of point of contact. Well, this was like the other point that we were discussing. It was always there in the rules, certain rules of 2013. But mind you, it is not so that the POC has to be resident in India. But unfortunately, because of the 6-hour requirement, the industry guys are now saying that, listen, we don't have an option. It has to be someone in India, because otherwise, how do we react in 6 hours? Probably lies with certain things like those. So you're forced, per se, to have a point of contact in India.
I mean, but cybersecurity is more than a 24/7, 365-day job, right? So it doesn't really matter where you are because these are happening nearly constantly. So whether
Yeah,
you're
but most organizations are not staffing around the clock, not for these type of deals. A lot of organizations would have on-call points of contact. Even with a service provider, you may only be paying for live support during your working time, and then on-call or pooled resources afterwards. So the nature of your service provider relationship may need to change. Your own staffing model may need to change in order to provide greater coverage during the 24-hour cycle.
Right. I think so. This is a slide basically which is a snapshot of everything that we have discussed, all the key compliances. I'm not going to sort of call them out. It's there in front of you. But what could be the probable impact? Firstly, lack of harm-based approach for cybersecurity incident reporting. Tight timelines may give rise to operational challenges. Increase in the volume of reporting may overwhelm overseeing authority itself. There'll be loss of anonymity and increased possibility of data breach. We were discussing that because you will be saving those logs together at one place, and requirement of overhauling of system, and there'll be increased compliance burden and cost. Finally, I leave this to Jay. What would be the next steps?
Sure. So, this is the first step here and now. We're starting just to learn about it, understand the full scope. We are, as you all know, responding with a representation. Thank you all for those comments. We'll get a second draft out in the near future. I'm working with some other trade associations. Maybe we would consider a multi-association approach. But, we are going to ask the government for an opportunity to engage with them, whether or not they accept that, we'll have to determine. And then, of course, what are we actually asking for? I mean, one of the very common questions or, initial sort of actions is, hey, let's just delay this. But, the delay doesn't necessarily change it. We get this all the time where you might get a 6-month delay. Great. So now we're going to be talking about a June 31st deadline. I mean, for the same. So that's not particularly holiday cheer to sort of consider that. So fundamentally, we have to figure out what are the issues that we may or may not want to push back on. Do we have some alternatives? How do we work with the government and go from there? Of course, we could also work with India's trading partners to see if there's some other ways, if there's some, regional entities and whatnot. But, what we hear from, here and now is that in its current format, there seems to be almost structural issues in some regard. There seems to be a fair amount of scope creep, which I don't know if that's how you might push back on that, if it's covered in the IT Act or those sorts of things. But that's sort of what we're thinking about. So
Yeah, well, and I'd add in, Jay, there's no practical way for industry to comply with this. Putting aside the ambiguity and the scope creep and all these things, just the mechanism through which industry has to report these events is antiquated and unsustainable in terms of, it's basically a document that you fill out a little form with all the detail that you need, attach the logs, and either telephone CERT or fax them or send the form as an email. And so you're looking at an event type that is occurring numerous times a day with no electronic interchange to be able to report the event. And so just from that perspective, it's not practically implementable at the basic level.
I mean, when any cyber incident happens for that matter in any network, there are various stages of reporting, within the network, within the organization as well, right? So initial report, then comes detailed report, then comes the third level layer of report where you actually try to find out the root causes and the solution. And then the solution, so there are multiple reporting of the same incident within the, suppose if you're managing a network as a MS provider, then if the incident happens, which happens quite regularly, there are multiple reports at each level between different time periods. So, there are so many issues with which report to send, which not to send, right? Because they may belong to one incident only over a period of 6 months. So suppose the incident is too severe, there would be a 1 year time period sometimes to actually implement the changes, right? And there would be multiple reports at different levels because you may not be able to find the reason for that incident in 24 hours even, right?
Gauri, you put a message in there, should we revisit even the 2013 rules within the direction? Can someone smarter than me sort of, what does that actually mean?
No, so like we were discussing, Jay, that whilst this has been brought to the limelight right now and we are all very disturbed about it, some of this, Gauri has picked it up correctly, that some of it is also housed there in these rules. So if you're talking about fixing the issue, the fix has to come in totality. So if we have to refine and make it clean, all these previous rules also have to be cleaned up.
And presumably that would be through something like the Digital India Act that people are talking about, or would it be sort of as a smaller amendment?
Possibly. See, the Digital India Act, I understand, could be a little, longer horizon work. But right now, if we have to have a quick fix for this, probably amendments to the rules is something that we should look for. And in the longer run, definitely we need to take a holistic and a view like overhauling it through the Digital India Act.
Great. Any other final questions or comments before we wrap up here?
Yeah, just one quick one. Hey, hi Jay, this is Josefa. Supratim, basis your general industry on ground insights, have you seen any movement within which I don't know if Bishaka, I asked it, I logged out at that point in time, but have you seen any sort of discussions happening where this entire lawmaking should get challenged? Because there is some amount of ambiguity in terms of how these were introduced. They've not gone to parliament. Due process has been followed, not followed. So since Jay's also here, what is your experience been over the last few weeks basis discussions?
So maybe Jay, you want to start?
Right. I mean, so first we've reached out to the government. I think we're hearing not a lot from them, right? In terms of legal challenges, that's not something USIBC can get involved in. That's a standing policy of ours not to get involved in the judiciary. What our members do, individually is sort of up to them. But maybe I turn to legal counsel to give us some insights about whether or not these are challengeable and how might, individual companies or collectively kind of approach that.
Right. So I'll tell you what some of our clients are kind of doing. They're kind of at least assessing that, will it be prudent to go ahead and challenge? What are the grounds that are there? So that exercise to some extent has started, Jay. And let's see where, finally it settles, but it's initial discussions and assessment has already started.
So is it fair to say that if you have clients that are considering legal challenges, they should reach out to you to see if it's a valid action or not? So.
One question though, in a larger industry context, do you see the government of India is trying to kind of force the data centers for all the corporations to be here in India?
See, that's a larger discussion I think we have been having. Of course, there's a push to have data centers here in India. The budget gave it the status of infrastructure. You can clearly see the push is there. But that necessarily does not mean that you kind of come out with regulation directions, draft laws in regulations like these to push that agenda.
Yeah, I mean, because the government cannot say I want all the data centers here. They're actually kind of going through different routes, saying that okay, I want 6 hours, I want immediate reporting. So practically becomes impossible to actually have it anywhere other than India.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point. Nalima, you have your hands up. Thank you for your patience. Nalima Pagankar from TransUnion.
Thank you all to Khaitan and Jay and everyone for sharing. Given the fact that the compliance deadline is rapidly approaching and there are so many concerns, what's your thought on the notion that as companies comply in order to sort of respect the rules and the fact that if non-compliance can raise issues, what do you think that's going to do to our ability to object to these terms, either structurally, operationally, pragmatically? Because the government could come back and say, well, you're complying, aren't you? So, what's it, does it undermine the argument that it's impractical to comply because we would have started complying and they can use that against us? I just want to understand what your thoughts are on the effectiveness and the timing of advocacy and the sequencing of how quickly we need to move.
Nalima, I mean, you raised such a great question. I have no idea how to answer this, right? I mean, even if you intend to comply just because it's the law of the land, it's gonna, I assume organizations are gonna significantly struggle to meet the deadline. And so then almost de facto, people will be out of compliance on June 28th, right? That's probably a Sunday. I haven't looked, but just what it feels like.
I think, Jacob, what you're going to get is you're going to get a lot of arguments, right? I mean, all of these words that are poorly defined can be used against industry, but they can also be used against CERT. So I didn't think that was a targeted probe. I didn't think that was a suspicious activity. It didn't seem suspicious to me. I see it all the time. I know exactly what it is. I didn't think that was a potential attack. So where there are, poorly defined meanings, industry can play the same game and just use those in their own way and say, oh, I'm completely compliant. I haven't told you anything because I haven't triggered any of your, ambiguous terms.
Yeah. Eamon, you have a question? Eamon Sharma from PLR Chambers. Go ahead.
Yeah, hi, good evening, everyone, and good morning, wherever people are. I just wanted to add to that question of whether due process has been followed so that was very interesting in terms of a judicial challenge, because if you see under section 70B4 of the IT Act, CERT is mandated and empowered to issue such directions. Whether these directions are broad or vague or unclear in language or even in terms of applicability to industry, that has to be a far more detailed discussion with the government. A judicial challenge and how these rules have been issued would not be based on very firm ground, in my opinion.
Thank you for that. As we approach the hour, any other questions or comments? Going once, going twice. Let me thank everybody who joined today. I know it's either late or early or somewhere in between. We really appreciate your time. I want to specifically thank the Khaitan company team and the Juniper folks. I know you all have spent hours developing thoughts and how to respond to this. And so with that, I'm super appreciative. For our members, please feel free to reach back to me on any comments or questions. We will share these slides, and I'm happy to connect you directly with any of the speakers. In terms of specific activities, we'll be having some internal deliberations to figure out where USIBC moves forward on these, and certainly welcome your thoughts. So with that, let me thank Super Team. Thank you for hosting us here. Aditya as well, and Drew on the line. I just want to say one final thing. In terms of format, having you here and others, I think it was really good to have this discussion really generated. And I want to thank our participants as well for really making this a conversation. as we try to move back together again and drive these debates. We really appreciate your support and understanding as we work through this together. So with that, have everybody in the United States, please enjoy the rest of your day. For those in Singapore, please go to bed. And for those here in Mumbai, I guess it's time to have some dinner. And so thank everybody again, and talk to you soon. Over and out.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jay.
Sure.